I love disturbing media. I don't know why I do. There's probably something deeply wrong inside of me, but therapy is expensive and making YouTube videos is a lot cheaper, although it's a lot more time consuming at the same time, so I don't think I'm saving that much time. But anyway, I also love reading. I made it my goal this year to read 52 books, and I'm doing pretty good. I'm at 30 or so books right now. I've really fallen off as of late with all the work I've been putting into the channel. But it's given me time to reflect on everything that I've read this year and kind of think about it more. A big focus of my reading has been horror literature, reading old classics like The Exorcist along with more contemporary horror novels like Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. And I was sharing my recent reading exploits with my brother when he suggested that I take a look at Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. He told me that it was a book where the only meat that is legal to consume is human meat, and that he had tried to read the book but couldn't get past the first few chapters because it started describing how they used kids in the factory farming process, so naturally I ordered the book off of Amazon that night. A couple days later it arrived and I spent 2 days absolutely devouring it, pardon the pun. I really enjoyed the book and wanted to recommend it to some of my friends, but I quickly realized that not everybody wants to read a depraved book about humans being harvested and slaughtered like animals, and I can't really blame them. But now I have a YouTube channel where I can say whatever I want and see if any of you freaks out there share my thoughts. So I wanted to give a brief summary of the events of the novel, and when I say brief, I mean like 30 minutes long. I wrote that at the beginning when I was writing the script. And then after that, I'm going to go into depths on my thoughts about the use of extremism in literature and the ways in which this book personally affected me. Spoilers for Tender is the Flesh, by the way. I do recommend giving it a read if you aren't bothered by violence and cannibalism and just general debauchery. But here we go. Our book starts out with our main character, Marcos, going to a local tannery to do some business with the owner. Marcos is the operations manager of a meat processing plant. His job is to make sure the right amount of cattle are going to the right places and that everything runs smoothly. And I should also clarify that when I say cattle, I mean human beings. Yeah, Tender is the Flesh takes place in a dystopia where a virus has rendered all animal meat deadly to consume. This drove world governments to come up with an inventive solution, eating human beings. Throughout the book, we find out that the virus that infected the animals may have never really existed, and the government is just using it as a convenient excuse to kill off the lower class and poor people and people that they see as less desirable. It's actually very similar to The Purge in that way. One aspect to this dystopia that really gets to me is the fact that the reality of eating other humans is relatively new. Marcos grew up eating animal meat and was a teenager during the transition, as they call it. Due to this, he has some qualms about being a cannibal, but not enough to quit his job at a meat processing plant, so make of that what you will. Throughout the entire novel, we see Marcos portray himself as above those around him, because he seems to understand the moral dilemma of eating people, even going so far as to swear off of it near the end of the novel, but it all feels kind of hypocritical. At the end of the day, he's still directly profiting off of killing and eating humans, and the book understands that as well. The author only gives us the bare amount of empathy that we need not to fully turn on Marcos. We learn that he and his wife were separated because they tried for years to have a child, only for their first baby to die while still an infant. This is obviously very tragic. The framing kind of shows us this picture of a man whose life has been destroyed by the loss of a life, but he's compartmentalized himself so much, and due to this, doesn't understand the fact that he is responsible for the murders of thousands of humans every single day relating to his job at a meat processing plant. Marcos spends the first few chapters of the novel conversing with other members of the meat industry. We meet Senor Urami, who is the owner of a facility that turns human skin into leather, and a man who is just like way too into the process, and he's almost as like a sort of like Ed Gein type of person. Senor Urami even has a painting of Saint Bartholomew, who was a Catholic saint that was rumored to have been flayed to death. I wonder why Urami likes that image so much. After visiting the tannery where Senor Urami works, Marcos stops in at a breeding center, and it's at this point that I'm going to have to give a content warning. I won't be describing everything that goes into the process of killing other human beings in detail, even though the book certainly does all of that. But if you are someone who does not want to engage with like the systematic artificial forced breeding of human beings, then please go watch another one of my videos instead. There's some other good ones up there. You don't have to watch this one, but if you're into that kind of stuff, then let's keep going. Okay, so Marcos heads to the breeding center where the owner, El Gringo, is giving a tour to a German businessman who is wanting to get into the business of selling human meat. Through the tour, we generally see that El Gringo is like morbidly proud of the operation. The German is enthusiastic and unbothered, but can't help from referring to the people as humans, which is a big no-no. Marcos is disgusted by the entire practice, but sticks it out to make a few extra bucks. Go figure, Marcos. We are shown what they call a teasing stud. This is a man that they use to show them which females are ready to be impregnated. He just sits in a cage all day until they release him onto the females, and then he attempts to mate with them before he's stopped and put back inside his cage. The German remarks that he thinks that he doesn't have too bad of a life, and this makes everybody else really uncomfortable. Not because of the morbid, terrifying situation in, but it's mostly that this German person has referred to the cattle or the product as a human being, which again is really frowned upon in society, going to the fact that they say it's illegal. We are told that all of the humans that are used for meat are born and raised in captivity, have their vocal cords removed, and are branded on the forehead to determine whether they are first generation pure, meaning they were born in captivity and have not been given any growth hormones. The captive humans are also branded every year of their lives, so they have these burn scars just all over their bodies. It's really gross. We are then shown women who are being milked by machines, and also treated to a female who has been given growth hormones to put more meat on her bones. She is barely able to stand up and walk due to all the excess growth on her, but like everything, it is all just shrugged off by the three men. And then they are all treated to a delicacy, sandwiches made from child meat. Yeah, that was when my brother noped out of the book, and I really can't blame him. It's just gross. Afterwards, Marcos does some business with El Gringo and stops by a butcher that he shares a sort of mutual attraction with. Later in the novel, they make love on the butchering table, and it is very gross. This is just to drive home the fact that while Marcos thinks he is gaining empathy for the slaughtered humans, he is really meeting his twisted philosophy in the middle and treating everybody like meat. After the butcher shop, he stops by a nursing home where his dad is staying. His dad has dementia, and it is implied that he suffered an extreme mental break when faced with the reality of being forced to eat other people. And I know it's a little morbid, but honestly, good for him. That's like the appropriate reaction to be putting in that position. Marcos always seems to maintain the fact that he does the work he does in order to take care of his dad, but it is never stated that working in the meat industry is the only option for Marcos. He seems like a generally savvy businessman, but prefers the comfort of a field that he is just comfortable in, one that makes him a lot of money. When Marcos returns home, he has been left a gift by El Gringo, and it's a first-generation pure female. Marcos is upset by this, but not really in like a moral outrage kind of way, more of a now I have to deal with this kind of way. He thinks about butchering the woman, but instead just puts her out in his barn and goes to bed. The next day, Marcos returns to work and is briefed on a couple new occurrences. That being that the night before, a night guard has been fired because he sexually assaulted a female in captivity to death. Marcos is just mostly concerned with making sure that the security company reimburses them for the loss in profit on the livestock. And then the second occurrence is that they have 2 new job applicants, and Marcos is tasked with giving them a tour of the processing plant. We then start our tour of the meat processing plant. He takes the 2 men to the unloading yard, where they are shown that the excrement found in the trucks during the ride to the processing plant is harvested and used for manure. He says that upon arrival, the livestock, or again, the human beings, are allowed to take it easy for a day, but only because stress apparently makes the meat taste worse. During this whole tour, we see that one of the applicants is like really into the whole process, super creepy, and the other one can't really stomach it. And Marcos isn't particularly pleased with either of the 2 men. We are shown that the more physically capable males are marked for use in the hunting preserves, so yes, humans are also hunted like animals in this world as well. This is a particularly telling detail because it reveals that the processing and consumption of human meat isn't strictly utilitarian. They also use these people as game for their own enjoyment. Other humans are then marked to be taken to the laboratory, where they are experimented on a manner similar to Joseph Mengele and the Nazi experiments during the Holocaust. Next, we are shown the process of stunning the livestock. Sergio, one of the workers in the plant, is in charge of knocking out the people before they are killed and slaughtered. This is done by hitting them over the head with a club. The person, or the victim, the livestock, whatever you want to call them, is brought into the room naked with their hands tied behind their back. Then they are chained by their neck to the wall, and Sergio comes up to them, pats them on the head, whispers something to calm them down, and then hits them over the head. They are then taken away to be slaughtered, and Sergio just sends the next one in. We are never told what Sergio and the other stunners say to the victims in order to keep them calm. We're only told that it's different for each stunner. After this, one of the two potential hires throws up, and then the other one eagerly asks if he can have a turn at stunning. Sergio, the stunner, laughs and respects the energy of the recruit, but declines to let him have a go for fear of ruining the meat, like not getting a clean hit, or keeping them alive so they die stressed out and the meat tastes worse. It's all terrible. After this, we are told about the slaughtering process. The stunned humans who are now unconscious have their throats slit, and then they're bled dry before being tossed in a giant vat of boiling water. The woman that Sergio stunned earlier, like a couple minutes ago, wakes up for a second. She wasn't fully knocked out, before being chased down and then being executed with a captive bolt pistol. Then the taller of the two recruits throws up again, and the shorter guy still seems like way too into the process. Marcos then reprimands one of the workers for letting the woman who Marcos stunned wake up, and then says that the meat will taste bad because she died in a state of fear. The bodies in the boiling water are removed and then spun through a machine that removes all of the hair off their bodies. Marcos remarks that this is the one part of the process that still gets to him. Again, a glimpse of humanity from Marcos, but any sane person would just be seriously grossed out by the entire ordeal. The bodies are then removed of their organs and tongues and extremities and processed into meat. We are told about one of the butchers a couple years back who decided to try to free the captive humans one day. He had just enough of butchering other living humans and tried to get them to all run away and escape the slaughterhouse, but they're born and raised in captivity and didn't get very far, and a lot of them had just been so worn down that they just stayed inside their cages and waited for their turn to be killed. Marcos then notices that the shorter of the two applicants, the one who's like really into the whole thing, has his phone on him and is recording the butchering process. Marcos confiscates his phone, breaks it, and then tells him to leave and says that he will be reporting him to all the other processing plants he knows. Marcos dismisses the two applicants after that, but hints to the taller one that he will be soon hired. He gives a polite thank you, but doesn't seem too stoked with his new career. I mean, go figure, I can't really blame him. And after a long day of hard work, Marcos returns home and mourns over his crappy life. He gets drunk and decides to take his dead son's old crib and burn it in the front yard. At the same time, he also frees the captive female that he has in his barn, and he just decides he doesn't really care what happens to her. He falls asleep outside next to the fire, and she falls asleep next to him. Marcos then goes to the butcher shop that he visited earlier and basically forces himself onto the butcher. There's definitely a level of attraction between the two of them, but it just feels like he's losing control and taking it way too far. They have their relations on the butchering table while it's still bloody, and the whole affair is just really, really gross. After that particularly rough chapter, Marcos heads to his sister's house. The two of them don't seem to get along very well. She has adapted really well to the new normal practice of just like eating humans and seems to be upset that Marcos holds even some sort of superficial resentment towards that idea. Marcos' sister also has two children who just seem like absolute weird little freaks. The two kids are just kind of giggling and being weird at the dinner table, and they say that they are thinking about what their uncle Marcos tastes like, and their mom gets super upset at this and tells them that they don't eat humans. She seems to be in some serious denial about her situation, that being that they literally snack on humans on a daily basis. In fact, the real reason she invited Marcos over in the first place was just to suss out whether his meat processing plant would sell live humans directly to her to use for meat. Marcos then briefly stops by an abandoned zoo where he finds a couple of puppies that he just gives names to. He names them all after the Rolling Stones. He knows that he shouldn't be interacting with them on account of the virus, but he fully doesn't believe in this virus at the point. Again, if you don't remember, the virus is supposedly a virus that all animals got that would kill people if they ingested it, and so that's why the world moved to eating human meat. Marcos doesn't believe in it. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest that it was a real thing. After this, he travels back home, and he finds the captive woman inside the house, and at this point, he decides to partake in the forbidden act of using her for his own sexual desires. Again, it's very forbidden. It's illegal. You'll be put to death if people found out that you've done that. Again, it's messed up that he's doing this, but the entire thing is somewhat hypocritical because they are just slaughtering these people indiscriminately, so it should all be forbidden, but particularly the act of using somebody for a sexual act is really, really terrible in this world and should be terrible in any world. It's terrible what he's doing to her. And that ends the first part of the novel. After this, we skip forward 8 months and we found that Marcos now has his captive female living inside the house with him. He gives her a room and lets her watch TV and does some superficial things to take care of her. On the surface, you might think he's trying to treat her with respect until you realize that she is now 8 months pregnant and start to get terrible vibes about just like the entire situation that Marcos has put himself and this woman into. Marcos then leaves for work, and when he arrives, he finds a group that seems to be part of a cult. They occasionally donate one of their members to the processing plant to be slaughtered. The cult just feels that serving as sustenance to others is like the greatest honor that one can attain, and the whole situation is just super unnerving. We don't find out much more about this cult, but the whole thing just really creeps me out. Honestly, it reminds me of, if any of you have watched the Purge TV show, in that there's also like a cult of kids that donate themselves to be murdered during the Purge. Again, a very similar feeling. These willing sacrifices to the meat processing plant are not processed like normal meat. They are instead given to the scavengers, since eating a person with a first and last name, somebody with an identity, has always been deemed illegal. Marcos reflects on an instance where a young woman was offered up as a sacrifice, but she got cold feet at the last moment. It doesn't matter. She was still stunned and killed like any other captive human. Again, just an absolutely terrifying image to put inside your head. Marcos checks his phone. We found that he has 24-hour surveillance on the captive woman inside his house that is now pregnant. We also learned that he has named her Jasmine, and he's, again, taking care of her in a superficial manner. She, if you don't remember, she can't speak because she was raised in captivity and her vocal cords have been removed. So, again, really messed up situation. He's just kind of monitoring her to make sure that the baby inside of her is safe. The novel at this point is trying to write it like he's starting to think of her as an actual human being, but his thoughts about the situation are almost more like he views her as like a pet or just any other domesticated animal. He doesn't let her use the actual bathroom. Instead, she just has a bucket in her room. He confiscates the knives because she accidentally cut herself, and he seems very concerned about that, but it's more to do, again, with the child inside of her and less for her own safety. After everything that went on at the processing plant, Marcos takes a trip to a hunting reserve where he kind of socializes with these really rich and powerful people who are there to hunt other humans. And we're also told that some destitute people willingly enter into the hunting reserve to be shot at in hopes that they will survive for like a predetermined amount of time. And if they do, they win a whole bunch of money. It's very similar to The Most Dangerous Game. If you've ever read that, you should. It's a really awesome short story. We learned that a famous rock star fell on hard times and opted to be hunted. That's why this group of like rich and powerful people are there. To them, it's just this extra fun sport because the guy they're hunting is like a well-known person in society. Again, earlier said it was forbidden to eat somebody with a first and last name. In this like meal, they're all talking about this person, addressing him by his first and last name. So it's just hypocritical. We're told that this particular rock star was killed like the hour before his time was up in the reserve, and he would have made a lot of money. And we even see the wealthiest person in the group, the one that killed this particular rock star, eating his genitals, which is just absolutely disgusting. And if you want to click off the video now, then I really wouldn't blame you. I can't even believe the words that are coming out of my own mouth at this point. On his way home from the dinner with the hunting party, Marcos stops by the zoo again and finds that a group of teenagers are now torturing the dogs that he was playing with earlier and that he had given names to. The author makes the choice not to describe in detail what the kids are doing to the dogs, and Marcos leaves before he can even see them being killed. Again, just kind of reinforcing this insane double standard of how he can watch humans be slaughtered all day long, but can't stand it when it's happening to other animals. Marcos then returns home and is visited by an inspector who asks to see the captive female that he has. This is a huge problem for Marcos, since anybody knowing that she is pregnant would have Marcos sentenced to death. The inspector comes around every month, but it had previously been a man who didn't ask to see the female and only wanted a signature. This new inspector comes in and wants to do his job properly, but Marcos is able just to convince him to just take a signature and leave. After this close brush with being found out, Marcos goes to the room that he is keeping Jasmine in. He hugs her, he feels her belly, and then just starts crying. He remarks that she seems to show some affection towards him, even though she can't really express it due to being raised in captivity and not having vocal cords. And the next day he has a picnic with her and dances with her under a tree that he used to take his dogs to back when it was legal to own dogs. Later in the night, he receives a call from his father's nurse and rushes to the care facility where his father is being taken care of. He finds out that his father has passed away, and this just seems to kind of break something inside of Marcos. And this is when he fully resolves to stop eating human meat, and it feels like he's turned a corner. He has kind of adopted the outrage that his dad felt previously at their new world, and he just seems to be kind of fed up with all of it at this point. Marcos does not want to hold a funeral for his father, but his sister does. Marcos still kind of seems to be traumatized from the funeral that he had of his own child, and so he doesn't want to do another one of those for his dad. He doesn't want to bring that back up. So he cremates his dad, and we find out that almost everybody in this world are cremated, since that's the best way to ensure that nobody is going to eat the corpse of your loved one. Again, why am I doing this to myself? Why do I enjoy reading this stuff? It's a great book, but man, it's heavy. The next day, we see that Jasmine is now showing a lot more affection to Marcos. She hugs him, and then he kisses her. Marcos is then told by his boss that he needs him to stop by a laboratory, and Marcos says that he will, but it will be the last thing he does before he resigns. His boss isn't happy to hear this, of course, but Marcos is just fully committed to getting out of the meat trade at this point. The trip to the laboratory is pretty harrowing. The lady that runs it is just like a real piece of work. She is another person who seems to enjoy what she is doing to these captive humans a little bit too much. We see one of the captive humans who is being given a steady supply of heroin over the course of a year, so they can just like study the effects of addiction and withdrawal in the body. We also see live specimens that have their eyes removed and others being vivisected, or if you don't know what vivisection is, it means going through the process of being dissected while still alive. And they mentioned they give them just enough of a sedative to make sure they don't pass out, but that person is still feeling all the pain while it's happening. It's just truly terrible. In the next room, we see another captive human who is kept alive, but so he has his heart and other internal organs exposed so they can more easily study them. Like he's literally like been cut open, torn open, and is still living. This whole section of the book makes me queasy in a way that other parts of the book don't. I don't really know why, but something about just like the weird medical procedures they're doing really gets to me. We see other rooms with children whose mothers are killed in front of them so they can just like record the reaction of how those kids react. Marcos just remarks that there's nothing really to study since they already know the result of what happens when a kid is like loses their parents. It seems like a useless experiment to him. And the last group of victims that we see in the laboratory are captive humans who have their heads put into metal cages that then violently shake and rock back and forth just to induce blunt force trauma to their skulls and brain continuously. Some of them are dead and just being shaken around. Some of them are still alive, but in insane amounts of pain. I promise we're getting close to the end, so just like bear with me for another couple minutes and we'll be out of the woods here. After his trip to the laboratory, Marcos goes to his father's farewell service at his sister's house. Again, he did not want to have a funeral, but she decided to have one anyway, and he feels like he needs to show up. Here, the people there are proudly eating human meat while mourning the death of another human. Marcos then sneaks his way into the kitchen and into a cold storage vault that they have, and he finds that his sister is keeping a live domestic female in there to use for meat. She even has a book. It's called like Death by 1,000 Cuts. And it shows her how to carve the meat from this woman in a way to make sure that the woman is still alive after it's all being done. It's really gross, really disgusting, and like, I cannot imagine the level of cognitive dissonance that you would have to be attending a funeral and then keeping another human locked up so you can slowly cut pieces off them and eat them over the course of like a year. It's disgusting. Marcos tells his sister off for just generally being the worst and then just leaves the party. On his way home, he receives a call from the secretary of the place he used to work at. Again, it's the meat processing plant, but he has said he's resigned. But he gets a call from them, and she said that there's a situation going on that they need him for. So he goes back to the processing plant, and we find that a bunch of scavengers, like local scavengers, have tipped over one of the transport trucks and scattered all of the captive humans inside, and they are now just like indiscriminately slaughtering them and feasting on the meat, and to the point where the owner of the processing plant refers to them as savages, which is just incredibly ironic. Like, yeah, it's messed up when these guys do it, but when you do it in your fancy building where you just indiscriminately do this in a systematic way, for some reason it's not disturbing. It's just really ironic to me. And the whole scene is really gross. One of the worst ones to read in the book. Marcos then just like calls in the local law enforcement to get it taken care of, reaffirms to his boss that he is done doing all this stuff and he's quit. And then he goes home and he finds that Jasmine's water has broke and she is about to give birth. At this point, he calls his estranged wife. So I mentioned at the beginning, but him and his wife were separated because their child had died. And he hasn't really talked to her at all, but he calls her at this point and he tells her that she needs to get to the house immediately. The two of them then successfully deliver Jasmine's baby, while Marcos is kind of encouraging Jasmine the entire time and like kissing her and telling her that she can do it. Marcos's wife is disgusted by the fact that he even got a captive woman pregnant, but all of this kind of changes when the baby is born. After the baby is born, Jasmine reaches out to like grab the child and take care of it, but Marcos and his wife don't let her see the baby. After this, Marcos goes to the kitchen, he returns, he kisses Jasmine on the head and then sings softly in her ear, and then he hits her over the head with a big old club. And his wife gets mad at him, not because he just killed the woman, but she just remarks that the woman could have provided them with more children. Marcos then takes Jasmine back to the barn to be slaughtered and remarks that she had the human look of a domesticated animal. And that is Tender as the Flesh. Pretty depressing, right? The entire book, like when I first read it, the ending really kind of got to me, but mostly because I wasn't kind of picking up on the fact that Marcos, while he was kind of over being in the meat trade, he was still looking at Jasmine as just kind of like a means to an end or a helpful tool. So the ending of him just killing her and taking the baby was like a really kind of a twist to me. A lot of people that read it don't read that as a twist because they see the way Marcos has been treating her and the way that he just reacts in general to the process of the meat trade. And I think that's probably the proper way to read it. For some reason, that wasn't going through my head when I was doing it. I rather enjoyed this book, even though it's like really depressing and disturbing. Like I said before, I enjoy disturbing media. And if you're somebody who wants to get a good example of like extremism in literature, then I would take a look at this book. I really enjoyed it. It is originally written in Spanish. That's why the character's name is Marcos. At the beginning, there's a character named Señor Urami and El Gringo. I would love to eventually read the book in its native Spanish. I actually do speak Spanish, so I could do that. But if you're looking for a good example of extremism in literature, then Tender as the Flesh is a great example of that. The book also seems to be giving off some sort of kind of like vegetarian or environmentalist message. I'm not sure if that was the express purpose of the novel, but it definitely got me to think twice about the way that we treat livestock and factory farming. I do eat meat. I'm I'm not like vegetarian or anything for any ideological reasons, but it did get me thinking like we shouldn't just be kind of maybe slaughtering these animals and having them live just terrible lives in captivity. Maybe they should have some sort of standard of quality of life before they are killed. Again, I don't know if that's the express message of the story, but I'm pretty sure that all of the process of killing the humans and how horrifying and disgusting it is just directly ripped from the way that we treat like livestock and cows today in our current society. Overall, I think one of the bigger ideas of the book and kind of one of the bigger messages is just hypocrisy and a good look at how kind of we can superficially rail against a system or a set of beliefs, but in the end, we really benefit from them. So like if we are living off the benefits of an ideology or a social structure, but then we're saying like, oh, I'm so against this thing, like that's kind of hypocritical in the meantime. I'm not saying that you shouldn't rail against bad systems and bad power structures, but there should be some level of sacrifice, of personal sacrifice that you are willing to give up before just like condemning a system while still, profiting and benefiting from it. And that is going to be the video. I know it's a little bit longer than what I usually do with my usual stuff, and it's also very different. My mom watches this channel, and so do some of my siblings, so I honestly hope you didn't watch this one because this is like really disturbing. But if you like this stuff, then please let me know. Like I said, I like reading disturbing media. So if you're interested in more breakdowns and stuff like this, then I would love to hear about it. If you could subscribe as well, that would be awesome. I'm at like 300 subs right now. I want to hit 500 by the end of the summer. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. The support really is awesome. It's been really great. I've got like 400 views on my video about Gabe from The Office. And that one was kind of poorly produced, and I'm just really happy that it's gotten that much attention. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. See ya.